I remember the day. It was sunny. It was summer. A sunny summer day at the park. Just me and my kid playing on the swings while me in my head ready to freak out. I felt lost. So I pick up my book. I keep pushing with the left hand. I begin writing with the right hand. And this is how it all began. I was pulled apart in many places. I was a new dad. But I was already at an irreconcilable point in my marriage. There I was, actively being a poet and happily writing poetry, but I was also actively and destructively living the lives of an alcoholic and an addict. It was quite a stew. When I wrote Rebound, H2O was a recent hit. And though I was still feeling high from it, I had hit writer's block. So this was like a rebound back from wherever I was, and I was lost. Lost. So I travel backwards. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where I'm at. So where the hell have I been? Because there's a lot of loss in the lifestyles of addicts and alcoholics. You lose family. You lose friends. You lose time. But sometimes I can capture clarity. And it's often encompassed in conversation. I remember a particular conversation with a man who said he rarely spoke his words out loud. He believed he had powerful thoughts. He rarely spoke his innermost thoughts out loud. Even when he was alone, he was a silent man. For he believed that if he spoke the words out loud, they would elevate through the ether. They would ascend into the atmosphere, but gradually they would go with gravity. And they would land inside the heads of the open-minded, where they would ferment, where they could come to fruition for someone else. He was speaking on the innate power of words to make things real. If you speak the words out into the world's gonna hear you. If you don't know differently, then you don't know what's wrong. If you believe the can-lit community is very white today, it was whiter by far 23 years ago when I began this path of performance poetry. Back when I began, it didn't feel like there was a whole lot of room in can-lit for BIPOC. When I was living in Toronto, it felt like a black and white thing. Can-lit community was throwing events 7 days a week, facilitations, novel releases, workshops, open mics, 7 days a week. And I was there. And when I was there, I was usually one of the 3, 2, or 1 black poets, performers, patrons, or people who were present. Not so with the black-lit community. You see, there were far fewer gigs. I'm going to assume that means far less funding. Therefore, it made the can-lit community far more available to me. So eventually, this created a dichotomy. The feelings of being liberated and isolated. You see, I was feeling isolated because often when I looked around, I was the only one looking like me. Now here comes the duality. You see, when it came to the can-lit community, I did not perceive that I was well received for how I look and how I say it. When it came to the blacklit community, I don't perceive that I was well received for what I look like and what I don't say. Now, the more things change, the more they remain the same. So over time, I remained a blacklit unfavorite, but I became a canlit favorite. This is one of my favorite poems because it makes me feel alight and alive. I like this poem because it helped me tap into my internal chronometer. It helped me mess with the manual metronome. It helped me tinker with the tempo. I learned to get into the esoteric language. For instance, at one point I say, like Martin Luther King Jr., truth mover got a dream. I'm speaking on living, loving, leading, and learning. If I'm going to love this life of learning, I at least have to learn to lead myself. I mentioned Stephen King's short story, The Jaunt. You gotta let go. You just gotta let go. It's a short story about teleportation. The jaunt will jerk the body just fine through time, but it tends to leave the mind behind. Space and thought and time. Those themes can't help but work their ways into my works. Space and thought and time. I love the facts of science. I love the fantasy of sci-fi. Space and thought and time. Gene Roddenberry and Neil deGrasse Tyson. They are both heroes of mine. They put Africa into outer space and thought and time. They just can't help but get in there. Now forget what you think poetry is. You think through poetry. You feel through poetry. You flow through poetry. When I conceive poetry, when I conceptualize poetry, it is the universe, the celestial foundry of outer space and all that is within. When I personify poetry, she is a woman. The human foundry of us all. She is the reason we are all here. I love to perform this poem because it makes me feel alight and alive and on fire. And when you make that rebound, what happens next? Well, damn, you write some more. And that is how it is with breakdown. This rebound, a few of the pieces, a few of the parts. And when I perform this poem, it often actually reminds me that I can always rebound back to me so that I can begin again.